Sarah stood in the doorway, watching John with tear-filled eyes. The echo of his last words still reverberated in her mind. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah. I have to go." And then he was gone, leaving her alone, 7 months pregnant, with a broken heart and an emptiness that seemed impossible to fill. She sank into the kitchen chair, holding her rounded belly with trembling hands. The baby kicked gently, as if sensing the turmoil his mother was going through. The house, which once vibrated with laughter and promises of a future together, now seemed like a cold, silent cave. Every corner, every piece of furniture told a story of the love they shared. And now those stories crushed her with the weight of loss. The night wore on, but Sarah couldn't move. Tears ran freely down her face as she relived every moment that led to that devastating goodbye. The wedding, the shared dreams, the hopes for the future. Everything seemed to collapse into a heap of painful memories. She knew John was struggling with his own demons, but she never imagined he would leave her, especially now, when she needed him most. The following days were a blur of pain and confusion. Sarah tried to cling to any sign of normalcy, but John's absence was a black hole sucking all the joy out of her life. Neighbors whispered, offering condolences and pitying looks, but nothing seemed to ease the burden she carried. Loneliness was a suffocating cloak, and the thought of raising her child alone terrified her. In that small coastal town where everyone knew each other, the news of Sarah's abandonment spread quickly. Friends and strangers approached, trying to offer comfort, but she felt isolated, like an island surrounded by a sea of pain. Life continued around her, the sun still rose, the waves still broke on the beach, but for Sarah, time seemed to have stopped the moment John walked out the door. Determined to survive, Sarah knew she needed to find a way to move forward, not just for herself, but for the baby she carried. Each day was a battle against sadness and fear, but there was a flicker of hope, small and flickering, that refused to be extinguished. And it was this flicker that led her to make a decision that would change her life forever. To leave the town where all the memories of the past haunted her, and start anew in a place where she could rebuild her dreams. The salty morning breeze caressed Sarah's face as she drove down the winding road leading to the small coastal town of Havenport. The blue-gray sea stretched as far as the eye could see, its gentle waves breaking rhythmically against the rocks, creating a soothing melody that seemed to whisper promises of renewal. The wooden houses, with their weathered facades, lined the main street like silent guardians of ancient secrets. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to absorb the peace of that place. Havenport was a world apart from her previous life, a refuge where no one knew her story or her pain. She parked the car in front of a simple 2-story house she had hastily rented. The front yard was a bit neglected, but wildflowers still defied the chaos, blooming with an indomitable beauty. Like me, Sarah thought, with a flicker of determination. She entered the house, feeling the welcoming creak of the wooden floorboards under her feet. The place was modest, but it had a rustic charm that made her feel instantly at home. A large window in the living room offered a panoramic view of the ocean, and Sarah found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. It was the perfect place to start over, away from critical eyes and painful memories. In the first days, Sarah explored the town, absorbing the simplicity and tranquility that Havenport offered. The locals were friendly but not intrusive, giving her the space she needed to adjust. She found a small bakery that served the best homemade bread she had ever tasted, and a cozy bookstore where she got lost among the shelves, seeking comfort in the pages of books. One day, while walking along the beach, Sarah saw a group of children playing near the pier. Their laughter echoed in the breeze, reminding her of the innocence and simple joy that life could offer. She watched them for a moment, feeling a warmth growing in her chest, a feeling of hope she hadn't experienced in a long time. In that instant, she knew she had made the right decision by moving to Havenport. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Sarah sat on the sand, letting her mind wander. The ocean seemed to whisper stories of redemption and renewal, stories that intertwined with her own desires to heal and move forward. And it was there, in that moment of serenity, that she felt a deep connection to the place. Havenport was not just a refuge, it was a new beginning, a fresh chapter in her life where everything was possible. It was a cold and foggy morning in Havenport. Sarah, wrapped in a thick coat, walked along the beach, trying to clear her mind of the worries that haunted her. The sound of the waves gently lapping against the sand was almost hypnotic, providing a rare moment of tranquility in her tumultuous life. Suddenly, something on the horizon caught her attention. Through the mist, she saw an indistinct shape, a figure lying on the sand, almost hidden by the fog. Sarah's heart raced. She approached cautiously, fearing the worst but knowing she couldn't ignore it. As she got closer, she saw that it was a man, drenched and unconscious, with cuts and bruises scattered across his body. His face was partially hidden by a thick beard, and his clothes were torn and dirty, as if he had fought a battle with the sea itself. Sarah knelt beside him, feeling the urgency of the situation. She touched his shoulder, trying to wake him. "Hey, are you okay?" Her voice was full of concern. There was no response. Wasting no time, she used all her strength to help him up. He was heavy, and the task was not easy, but Sarah, determined, managed to get him to her house, where she laid him on the living room sofa. The fireplace, which she quickly lit, began to warm the room, offering a cozy contrast to the cold outside. As the man lay unconscious, Sarah ran to fetch a towel and a first aid kit. She carefully cleaned his wounds, trying not to be disturbed by their severity. The stranger seemed to have been through hell. As the hours passed, he began to show signs of life. He groaned softly, and his eyes, a deep and tormented blue, slowly opened, focusing on Sarah's figure. "You're safe now," she said gently, trying to convey calm. "I'm Sarah. You were on the beach hurt. I brought you to my house." The man blinked, confused and disoriented. "Daniel," he murmured, his voice hoarse and weak. "My name is Daniel." Sarah nodded, offering him a glass of water. He accepted it with a trembling hand, drinking eagerly. "Thank you," he said, his voice still faint. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." As the days passed, Daniel began to recover. His presence in Sarah's house brought a new dynamic to her life. He was reserved, carrying an air of mystery that only heightened Sarah's curiosity. But there was a genuine kindness in his eyes, a vulnerability that touched her deeply. Sarah discovered that Daniel was a fisherman, but he spoke little about his past. There was something dark in his stories, something he clearly avoided. And as she took care of him, an unexpected connection began to form. Amid the suffering and recovery, two lost souls began to find solace in each other, unaware that their fates were already intertwined in ways they could barely imagine. As the days passed, Daniel slowly recovered, but the mystery surrounding him seemed to grow with each moment. Sarah watched him as he moved around the house, always silent, always thoughtful. There was a deep sadness in his blue eyes, something that spoke of a past full of pain and regret. One afternoon, while the two were sitting on the porch, Daniel finally began to open up. The setting sun painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, and the sea breeze brought with it the salty smell of the waves. "I used to fish every day," Daniel said, looking at the horizon. "The sea was always my refuge, my escape. But it also carries many memories, many that I would rather forget." Sarah felt the pain in his voice. "What happened, Daniel? What brought you to Havenport?" He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "Broken promises. Life at sea can be hard, but the promises I didn't keep were even harder to bear." His eyes lost focus as he spoke. "I had a family once, a woman I loved more than anything. I made a promise to her, a promise I couldn't keep." Sarah realized that each word was a struggle for him. "What happened to her?" "She died," Daniel said, his voice almost a whisper. "And I blame myself every day for not being there, for not being able to save her. After that, I lost myself. I wandered from town to town, from port to port, trying to escape my own heart." Sarah reached out, touching his hand gently. "I lost someone recently too," she said, her voice laden with emotion. "My husband, John, left me when I needed him most. I was 7 months pregnant, and he just walked away." Daniel's eyes met Sarah's, and for a moment, they shared a silent understanding. a bond formed by their mutual pain. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said sincerely. "No one deserves to go through that." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sound of the waves crashing on the beach. It was a comforting silence, one that allowed them to process their pain without the need for words. "Why did you come to Havenport?" Sarah finally asked. Daniel hesitated before answering. "I was running away. I was attacked by men who wanted to force me to do something against my will. I managed to escape, but I got caught in the storm and ended up here. Maybe fate brought me to you." Sarah smiled, a sad but understanding smile. "Maybe it did." As the days went by, Daniel began to help Sarah with small tasks around the house. He fixed the garden fence, repaired the roof, and even made some new furniture for the baby's room. Each gesture, each act of kindness seemed an attempt at redemption, a way to make up for the past he couldn't change. And as they worked together, a silent trust and a deep friendship began to form. Sarah felt less alone, less desperate. And Daniel, in turn, found in Sarah a reason to continue, a reason to believe that perhaps there could be redemption and hope for him too. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the front door slowly open. She looked up and saw Daniel standing in the entrance, with an expression she couldn't decipher. There was something different about him that night, something darker, heavier. He walked in, closing the door behind him, and approached slowly. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and laden with a gravity that made Sarah's heart tighten. She nodded, turning off the stove and drying her hands on a dish towel. They sat at the table, the crackling of the fireplace in the background creating a contrast with the palpable tension in the air. Daniel took a deep breath, struggling to find the words. "I haven't been completely honest with you, Sarah," he began, his eyes fixed on hers. "There are things about my past that you need to know." Sarah remained silent, waiting for him to continue. She knew this moment would come, that Daniel was carrying something too heavy to keep secret for long. "I mentioned before about broken promises and my wife's death," he said, the pain evident in every word. "But I didn't tell the whole story. My real name isn't Daniel. I was known as James Holloway, and I was the captain of a fishing boat involved in illegal activities." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but remained still, listening intently. "James, or Daniel as she still knew him," he continued. "I was involved with dangerous people, smugglers who used my boat to transport illicit goods. At first I thought I could get out of that life, but every day I sank deeper. I made promises to my wife Rebecca that I would get her out of that life, that we would make a new life together. But when I tried to leave, they used her to control me." He paused, his voice choked with emotion. "Rebecca was killed because of my actions. They used her as an example to show what happens to those who try to leave. I found her too late, and that image haunts me every day." Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes, Daniel's pain almost tangible. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what you've been through." Daniel continued, with a firmer voice now, determined to tell everything. "After Rebecca's death, I fled. I changed my name and tried to disappear, but they never stopped looking for me. The men who attacked me and left me on the beach were part of it. They want to force me to go back, to continue the dirty work I started." Sarah felt a wave of fear and compassion for him. "You're safe here, Daniel. I won't let them hurt you again." He looked at her, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Sarah. But you need to know that by helping me, you're also in danger. These men don't care who they hurt to get what they want." She held his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We're in this together now. I won't let you face this alone." The bond between them grew even stronger that night, a connection forged in pain and truth. Sarah knew that the road ahead would be dangerous, full of uncertainties and challenges. But looking into Daniel's eyes, she saw something that encouraged her to continue hope. And in that hope, she found the strength to face whatever came, knowing that together, they could overcome even the darkest pasts. The days passed slowly in Havenport, and as Daniel continued to recover, he and Sarah grew closer and closer. There was a silent and comforting routine that established itself between the two. a careful dance of mutual support and understanding. Daniel helped with daily chores and preparations for the baby's arrival, while Sarah offered a friendly shoulder and a listening ear. One morning, Sarah woke up to a soft sound coming from the kitchen. She went downstairs and found Daniel making breakfast. He turned and smiled when he saw her, a smile that lit up his face marked by time and hardships. "Good morning," he said warmly. "I hope you like pancakes." Sarah smiled back, feeling a wave of warmth in her heart. "I love them. Thank you, Daniel." As they ate, they talked about simple things: the weather, their plans for the day, childhood stories. These moments of normalcy were precious to both, a necessary pause in the emotional storms they faced. Later, they decided to take a walk along the beach. The fresh sea breeze and the sound of the waves created a perfect environment for reflection and conversation. Daniel carried a picnic basket and occasionally cast a worried glance at Sarah, always attentive to her well-being. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. Sarah nodded, touching her belly with affection. "Yes, I'm fine. The baby seems to like the walks." They sat on a sand dune, looking out at the vast ocean before them. Daniel took a piece of bread from the basket and began to eat in silence. After a few minutes, he turned to Sarah, his eyes reflecting the setting sun's light. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you," he said sincerely, "for everything. For saving me, for accepting me despite my past. You gave me a new chance, something I didn't think was possible." She smiled, touching his hand gently. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Daniel. And I believe you have a good heart, despite what happened in the past." He squeezed her hand, feeling a deep connection. "I want to be here for you and the baby. I want to help in any way I can. Maybe this can be part of my redemption." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude and hope. "You are already doing more than you can imagine, Daniel." That night, as the moon shone over Havenport, Sarah and Daniel sat on the porch, sharing stories and dreams. There was a growing intimacy between them, a trust built on vulnerability and honesty. And although both knew that the future still held challenges, at that moment, they found peace and comfort in each other. The nights became moments of confiding, where Daniel shared more of his painful past, and Sarah revealed her own insecurities and fears about being a single mother. These deep and honest conversations were like a balm for their wounded souls, strengthening the bond between them. One night, while a storm raged outside, Sarah awoke startled by a nightmare. She went downstairs and found Daniel in the living room, looking out the window, lost in thought. He turned at the sound of her footsteps and, without saying a word, opened his arms. Sarah ran to him and he hugged her tightly, providing the comfort she so needed. They stayed like that for a long time, listening to the rain beating against the windows, finding solace in each other's presence. And in that embrace, a silent promise was made of mutual support, of facing the challenges that came, of finding strength in each other. The morning was radiant in Havenport, with the sun shining over the ocean and seagulls flying in a spotless blue sky. Sarah and Daniel decided to enjoy the day and walk around the town. More and more, their steps synchronized, not only in the rhythm of the walks, but in how they faced the challenges and discoveries that life presented them. While strolling through the local market, Sarah was captivated by an old photo at an antique stall. It was a sepia image of a smiling couple by the sea, holding a baby. "This photo is beautiful," she commented, picking it up to look closer. The vendor, an elderly man with a white beard, smiled as he saw her interest. "Ah, this photo has a special story," he said. "This couple helped found Havenport. They say they were destined to meet, despite all adversities." Daniel, who was beside her, looked more closely at the photo and turned pale. "That's my grandmother," he murmured, almost in disbelief. Sarah looked at him, surprised. The vendor raised his eyebrows, curious. "Then you must be a Holloway. Your family has deep roots here. Many stories and secrets buried in the sand." With his heart racing, Daniel bought the photo, and the two said goodbye to the vendor. They walked in silence to the beach, where they sat to process the discovery. "I never imagined my family had a connection to this place," said Daniel, still stunned. Sarah held his hand, trying to find the right words. Maybe it wasn't a coincidence that you ended up here. Maybe something was calling you back. Daniel sighed, looking at the horizon. My grandmother always talked about promises and intertwined fates. I think I never really understood what she meant until now. The following days were dedicated to exploring more about Daniel's roots in Havenport. They discovered old records in the town's library, where they learned about the Holloways and their influence on the community. There were stories of bravery, sacrifice, and love, themes that echoed in Daniel's own life. One afternoon, while they were in Sarah's house, rummaging through old photo albums they found in the basement, something extraordinary happened. Daniel found an old handwritten letter addressed to his grandfather. He began to read it aloud with Sarah by his side. "Dear James," he began, his voice trembling with emotion. "If you are reading this, it means our paths have crossed again, as I always believed they would. This place, Havenport, holds more than our memories. It holds our dreams and promises. Promises of eternal love, of redemption and new beginnings. I hope one day you find the peace you seek, and that our legacy continues through those we love." The letter's words echoed in the room's silence, and Daniel felt a deep connection with his past. Tears welled in his eyes as Sarah hugged him tightly. "I think I finally understand," he said, his voice choked. "My grandmother wanted me to find peace just as they did." Sarah, also emotional, looked at him tenderly. And maybe that peace could only be found here, where it all began. As they explored more, they discovered stories of forgiveness and second chances, of how the Holloways and other Havenport pioneers faced adversity and triumphed. Each discovery strengthened the bond between Sarah and Daniel as they realized they were destined to meet, that their paths were intertwined in ways they could never have imagined. 8. John's return. It was a quiet afternoon in Havenport. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, tinting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Sarah was on the porch, gently rocking in a rocking chair, finally feeling a sense of peace enveloping her. Daniel was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Life was starting to fall into place, and for a brief moment, Sarah felt that she could really find happiness again. Then she heard the sound of tires on the gravel driveway. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at that hour. Slowly getting up, Sarah walked down the porch steps and towards the car that had just parked. When the car door opened, her heart nearly stopped. John, her estranged husband, was standing there, with an expression that mixed regret and determination. He looked different, thinner, more tired, with an air of sadness that he didn't have before. Sarah felt a flood of emotions overwhelm her. Anger, pain, confusion, and surprisingly a glimmer of hope. "Sarah," he began, his voice hoarse and hesitant, "I know I'm the last person you expected to see, but I needed to come. I needed to try to fix things." She stood still, not knowing what to say. John's presence was a painful reminder of his abandonment, but also of a time when she believed in promises and shared dreams. "John," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Why now? After everything, why did you come back?" John took a step forward, trying to find the words. "I made a terrible mistake, Sarah. I was weak. I let fear and insecurity take over. When I left, I thought I was doing the best for all of us. But I was wrong. And every day away from you and our child was torment. I knew I had to come back, ask for forgiveness, and try to make things right." Before Sarah could respond, Daniel appeared in the doorway, drawn by the unfamiliar voice. Seeing John, his eyes narrowed in distrust. "Sarah, is everything okay?" he asked, quickly approaching. John looked at Daniel, immediately recognizing the bond between him and Sarah. "So this is the man who took my place?" he said, unable to hide a hint of jealousy. Sarah felt the tension rising. "Daniel, this is John, my husband," she explained, fighting back tears. "He says he wants to ask for forgiveness and fix things." Daniel remained firm but respectful. "John, I'm Daniel, and I'm here to support Sarah. She has been through a lot, and all I want is for her to be well." John nodded, seeing the seriousness in Daniel's voice. "I understand," he said sincerely. "I'm not here to cause more pain. I just want a chance to explain and, if possible, be forgiven." The three stood in silence, the sound of the waves breaking in the background. Sarah knew she needed time to process everything. "Let's go inside," she finally said. "We need to talk." Inside the house, the tension was palpable. They sat in the living room with John and Daniel on opposite sides, and Sarah in the middle, feeling like a fragile bridge between two worlds. John began to tell his story, his internal struggles, his failures, and his deep desire for redemption. "I know I can't undo what I did," John said, his voice heavy with regret. "But I want to be here for our child. I want to be the father he deserves and try to be the husband you deserve, Sarah." Sarah looked at him, feeling the sincerity in his words. But she also knew that the scars of his abandonment would not easily heal. "John, I need time," she finally said. "We need time." John nodded, accepting. "I'll stay in a hotel in town. I'll be here, waiting if you decide you want to talk more." Daniel, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Sarah, whatever your decision, I will be here for you. Always." Sarah looked at the two men in her life, feeling the weight of the decision she would have to make. She knew that the road ahead would be full of challenges, but also possibilities for healing and redemption. 9 secrets surface. The atmosphere in Havenport was charged with tension. John's return had stirred up dust over buried secrets, and Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She spent the night sleepless, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. By morning, the feeling that something was about to change was almost tangible. Daniel noticed Sarah's unease and suggested a walk along the beach to clear her mind. The salty air and the sound of the waves always had a calming effect on her. As they walked, Sarah finally spoke. "Daniel, I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to believe that John has changed, but another part is afraid of being hurt again." Daniel stopped and held her hands, looking directly into her eyes. "Sarah, whatever decision you make, I will be here for you. You don't have to face this alone." That afternoon, Sarah decided to face her fears. She went to the hotel where John was staying and asked him to meet her at the local cafe. When he arrived, he looked nervous but determined. They sat at a table in the corner, away from curious eyes. "John, I need to understand," Sarah began, her voice firm. "What really happened? Why did you leave me like that?" John sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sarah, I was lost. The pressure of work, the idea of being a father, all those responsibilities made me panic. I knew I was failing you and our child before he was even born. So instead of facing my fears, I ran away. It was the most cowardly thing I've ever done." Sarah listened to every word, feeling a mix of anger and empathy. "And now? Why did you come back?" "Because I realized that life without you is empty," John said, his voice choked. "I tried to rebuild myself, become a better man. I know I can't erase what I did, but I want to try to fix things. I want to be the father our child deserves, and if there is a chance, the husband you deserve." As John spoke, Sarah noticed something he was trying to hide. There was more to his story, something he hadn't yet told. "John, you're hiding something from me. What is it?" John lowered his head, visibly anguished. "There's more, yes," he admitted. "When I left, I got involved with people I thought could help me escape my problems. But I just sank deeper. I got into debt and did things I deeply regret. These people, they don't forget." Sarah felt a chill down her spine. "What kind of things, John? Who are these people?" He looked around as if expecting someone to be listening. "Smugglers," he whispered. "I got involved with smugglers, Sarah, and now they're pressuring me to pay my debts. If I don't, they threaten to come after me. And you." The revelation hit like a bomb, and Sarah felt the weight of imminent danger. Everything she had built in Havenport, the peace she was beginning to feel, was now threatened. "John, how could you put us in danger like this?" she exclaimed, her voice full of despair. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he said, his eyes filled with tears. "I was desperate, but I'm trying to fix it. Please give me a chance to make things right." Sarah got up, feeling suffocated. "I need time to think," she said, almost breathless. This is too much to process. She left the cafe, her heart heavy with the new burden of secrets and threats. When she returned home, she found Daniel waiting for her on the porch. Seeing her, he immediately noticed something was wrong. "Sarah, what happened?" he asked, concerned. She collapsed into his arms, tears streaming down her face. "John got involved with smugglers, Daniel. They threaten to hurt us if he doesn't pay his debts." Daniel remained silent for a moment, processing the information. "We'll get through this together, Sarah. No matter what happens, we'll find a solution." In the days that followed, Havenport felt like a minefield of emotions and uncertainties. Sarah found herself torn between her growing love for Daniel and the complicated history she had with John. The recent revelations weighed on her mind, and the decision about which path to take seemed impossible to make. That morning, Sarah walked along the beach, trying to organize her thoughts. The sound of the waves breaking against the shore was a comfort, but her mind was in turmoil. She knew she needed to make a decision, but feared the consequences of any choice she made. Back at the house, she found Daniel sitting on the porch, looking out at the horizon. He turned when he saw her, his gaze full of concern. "Are you okay, Sarah?" he asked, his voice gentle and full of affection. She sat next to him, holding his hand tightly. "I don't know what to do, Daniel. John came back saying he wants to change, but he brought so many problems. And then there's you. You were the light in my darkest moment." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "Sarah, I know it's hard. I won't pressure you to choose between us. What matters is what's best for you and the baby. I'll be here no matter what happens." Daniel's words, though comforting, did not ease the anguish in Sarah's heart. She knew that any decision she made would change their lives forever. But at that moment, all she wanted was a break from the pain and confusion. That night, as the storm raged outside, John knocked on the door. Sarah opened it, finding him wet and worn. "We need to talk," he said with an urgent tone. "I can't wait any longer. I need to show you something." Sarah hesitated but nodded, letting him in. John pulled an envelope from his coat and handed it to her. "These are documents that prove everything I'm saying. I'm trying to fix things, Sarah. I want to protect you and our child." She opened the envelope, finding financial records, letters, and photos detailing John's involvement with the smugglers. Each page was a painful confirmation of the complexity of their situation. "Why are you showing me this now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because I want you to know the truth," John replied. "I can't change the past, but I can fight for our future. If you give me a chance, I promise I'll do everything to protect our family." Sarah felt a wave of emotions: anger, sadness, hope. The tears came, and she let them fall freely. "John, you left me when I needed you most. And now you come back bringing danger and chaos. I don't know if I can trust you again." John looked at her, his eyes full of remorse. "I understand, Sarah, and I don't expect you to forgive me easily. I just ask for a chance to prove that I can be the man you and our child deserve." At that moment, Daniel entered the room, his eyes fixed on John. "I heard everything," he said calmly, "and I'll support whatever decision Sarah makes. But I want you to know, John, that if anything threatens her or the baby's safety, I won't hesitate to act." The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah looked at the two men who meant so much to her in different ways. "I need time to think," she finally said, feeling exhausted. John nodded. "I'll wait at the hotel. Let me know when you're ready to talk more." After John left, Daniel hugged Sarah. "We're in this together," he said softly. "No matter what happens, we'll be together." The morning dawned with a cloudy sky, perfectly reflecting Sarah's state of mind. She was in the kitchen making coffee when she felt the baby move. It was a constant reminder of the life growing inside her, and the urgent need to resolve the conflicts surrounding her. Daniel entered the kitchen, his presence always comforting. "Sarah," he said softly, "I know you're going through a tough time. I want you to know that whatever decision you make, I'll be by your side." She smiled, though it was a sad smile. "Thank you, Daniel. It means a lot to have your support." Sarah knew she couldn't delay the conversation with John any longer. She needed to confront her feelings and decide if she was willing to forgive him. With a heavy heart, she went to the hotel where John was staying. He greeted her with an anxious look, as if he knew this meeting would be decisive. They sat at a small table in the hotel lobby. John started speaking before Sarah could say anything. "Sarah, I know I hurt you deeply. I know I made mistakes that I can't even express. But I'm here to ask for a chance to redeem my mistakes. I want to be the father our child deserves and the husband you deserve." Sarah looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions. "John, you left me at a time when I needed you most. How can I trust that you won't do it again?" John took a deep breath, his eyes filled with regret. "I understand your distrust, but since I left, I realized how much I was wrong. I sought help, got involved in rehabilitation programs and therapy. I'm trying to be a better person, and I'll do everything in my power to prove that I've changed." Sarah felt the tears forming. "I don't know if I can forgive John. The pain you caused is too deep." He held her hand, his eyes fixed on hers. "Forgiveness isn't easy, I know, but I'm willing to work every day to earn your trust again. I want our child to grow up knowing he has a father who fought to be better." As John's words echoed in her mind, Sarah remembered something her mother used to say: "Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of pain." She knew she needed to find a way to move forward, whatever the decision. "John," she finally said, "I need time. Forgiving isn't something I can do overnight. But if you're willing to prove that you've changed, maybe we can find a way." John nodded, his eyes full of hope. "Thank you, Sarah. I won't disappoint you again." The following days were a constant test for Sarah. John began to get more involved, helping with medical appointments and preparations for the baby. He was determined to show that he was committed to change. At the same time, Daniel remained by Sarah's side, offering the emotional support she so needed. One night, while everyone was gathered in the living room, Sarah felt a wave of emotions. She observed the two men, each offering something unique and necessary. She knew she needed to make a decision for the good of all. "John," she began, her voice firm but gentle, "I appreciate the effort you're making, and I see that you're trying to be a better person. I'll try to open my heart to forgiveness, but that doesn't mean I'm ready to forget everything that happened." John nodded, accepting her words. "I understand, Sarah, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to regain your trust." Sarah then turned to Daniel. "Daniel, you've been my rock, and I want you to know that your presence in my life is invaluable." Daniel smiled, his eyes shining with affection. "I'll be here, Sarah, no matter what happens." It was a clear and sunny morning when Daniel received an unexpected letter. He was on the porch looking at the sea when the postman approached and handed him a worn brown envelope. With trembling hands, Daniel opened the letter and read the first lines. His expression changed from curiosity to determination. Sarah, who was inside the house, noticed the change in Daniel when he came in. "What happened?" she asked, worried. Daniel held the letter tightly. "Sarah, I need to go to Boston. There's something I need to resolve. Something I promised myself in my past." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean, Daniel? What's going on?" He sighed deeply, sitting next to her. "This letter is from an old acquaintance, someone who was involved with the smugglers. He wants to meet me. He says he has information that can help us get out of this situation." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. "This is dangerous, Daniel. What if it's a trap?" Daniel held her hand, his eyes full of sincerity. "I know the risks, Sarah, but I need to do this. I can't keep running from my past. And if there's a chance to resolve all this and ensure your and the baby's safety, I have to try." Sarah knew she couldn't stop him, but the fear for his safety was almost unbearable. "Promise you'll be careful," she said, her voice trembling. "Promise you'll come back to me." He pulled her into a tight embrace. "I promise, Sarah. I'll come back to you. And when this is over, we can finally have the peace we deserve." With a gentle kiss, Daniel left, leaving Sarah with a mixture of hope and fear. The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. She tried to distract herself with preparations for the baby, but the worry never left her. Meanwhile, Daniel arrived in Boston and met the old acquaintance in a discreet cafe. The man, a former smuggler named Mike, seemed nervous but determined to help. "Daniel, I heard you're trying to get out of this hole," he began. "And I'm willing to give you a hand, but it'll cost you." Daniel nodded. "I know. What do you want?" Mike looked around before continuing. "I want immunity for me and my family. In return, I'll give you all the information you need to take these guys down. They have a big operation, and you'll need solid evidence to take them down." Daniel considered the proposal. "And how can I trust you, Mike? How do I know you're not setting me up?" Mike placed a folder on the table. "Here's a taste of what I have. Documents, transactions, names. This is just a part. If you guarantee my immunity, I'll give you the rest." Daniel flipped through the documents, seeing names and transactions that confirmed the illegal operations. He knew this could be the key to resolving his problems once and for all. "I'll get you what you need," he finally said. "But if you betray me, Mike, there won't be a place in the world where you can hide." Mike nodded, understanding the seriousness of Daniel's words. "You have my word. I just want to get out of this life as much as you do." With the documents in hand, Daniel returned to Havenport, feeling a huge weight slowly being lifted from his shoulders. When he arrived at the house, Sarah was on the porch, anxiously waiting. Seeing him, she ran to him, hugging him tightly. "You came back," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I promised I'd come back," he replied, kissing her gently. "And I have good news. We have a real chance to end all this." Together, they reviewed the documents, planning the next steps to ensure everyone's safety. They knew there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time, they felt they had a real chance of winning. The day began with palpable tension in the air. Daniel and Sarah knew that the final confrontation was approaching. They had gathered all the necessary evidence to dismantle the smugglers' operation, but this meant putting themselves directly in the line of fire. John, determined to redeem himself, insisted on helping. "I got into this mess," he said, looking directly at Daniel and Sarah. "It's my responsibility. Let me do my part to protect our family." Daniel hesitated but knew John was right. "We need all the help we can get," he finally said. "But we all need to be aware of the risks. They won't give up easily." They spent the morning discussing the plan, every detail meticulously analyzed. Mike, Daniel's old acquaintance, had provided crucial information about where and when the smugglers would make their next move. The goal was to catch them red-handed and hand over the evidence to the authorities. In the afternoon, when everything was ready, Sarah felt a wave of emotions. She was about to face real danger, but at the same time there was a sense of hope. She knew that if everything went well, she could finally live in peace with Daniel and her child. She hugged Daniel and John, feeling their strength and love. "Come back to me," she whispered, holding back the tears. Daniel and John, armed with determination and evidence, went to the arranged location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Havenport. The tension was palpable as they waited in the darkness, each noise amplifying the anxiety. Mike was by their side, ready to confirm the smugglers' identities. Finally, the headlights of trucks illuminated the warehouse entrance. The smugglers arrived, conducting their illicit activities without realizing the trap awaiting them. Daniel, John, and Mike watched intently, waiting for the right moment to act. When all the necessary elements were present, Daniel signaled to John. "Now," he murmured. They moved quickly, blocking the exits and calling the police with the evidence they had. The smugglers, caught off guard, tried to fight back. A tense confrontation followed, gunshots echoing in the warehouse. Daniel and John moved with precision, using the advantage of the terrain they knew. Amid the chaos, John spotted one of the leaders trying to escape. Without hesitation, he ran after him. The leader of the smugglers, a burly and cruel man, turned and pointed a gun at John. "Don't move," he growled. John stopped, but the determination in his eyes didn't waver. "You're not getting out of here," he said firmly. Daniel, seeing the situation, tried to approach discreetly, but the leader noticed and turned ready to shoot. John, in an act of pure sacrifice, lunged forward, knocking the leader to the ground. There was a shot, and a cry of pain echoed through the warehouse. Daniel ran to John, who was on the ground, bleeding. "John! No! Hold on!" he pleaded, pressing the wound to stop the bleeding. The police arrived, arresting the smugglers and calling an ambulance. Sarah, who was waiting at home, received the call she had feared. She rushed to the hospital, her heart pounding wildly. When she arrived, she found Daniel in the waiting room, his hands stained with blood and his eyes filled with pain. "John, he sacrificed himself to save us," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "He did it for you, for our child. He proved he had changed." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she ran to the emergency room. She found John pale and weak but conscious. He looked at her, a faint smile on his lips. "Sarah, I kept my promise," he murmured. She held his hand, tears falling freely. "You were brave, John. Very brave." John closed his eyes, exhausted but at peace. "I love you," he whispered before losing consciousness. The doctors worked frantically to stabilize him while Sarah and Daniel waited outside, their hands intertwined in a gesture of solidarity and hope. 14. Difficult decisions. The night turned into an endless cycle of waiting and hope. The hospital was quiet, except for the occasional sound of hurried footsteps from the nurses. Sarah and Daniel waited anxiously for news about John, their hands intertwined in a gesture of mutual comfort. Finally, a doctor emerged from the emergency room, with a tired but hopeful expression. "He's stable," he said, and a collective sigh of relief escaped Sarah and Daniel's lips. "The next 24 hours will be critical, but we're optimistic." Sarah felt a wave of relief mixed with a new wave of uncertainty. John had risked his life to save them, proving he was willing to change. But now, with his life hanging by a thread, Sarah knew that difficult decisions needed to be made. In the days that followed, John remained in a coma. Sarah divided her time between the hospital and home, where Daniel did his best to keep her strong and supported. Each visit to the hospital was a test of patience and faith, each look at John a reminder of the sacrifice he had made. One afternoon, while Sarah was sitting beside John, holding his inert hand, she felt the baby move again. It was as if he too was waiting for his father to recover. She began to speak softly, telling stories from the past, hopes for the future, and her conflicting feelings. "John," she whispered, "I know you fought for us, and I'm so grateful for that. But now I need to know what to do. Daniel has been my pillar, and I feel something strong for him. But you are our child's father, and that will never change." As Sarah spoke, she felt a slight pressure in her hand. She looked up and saw John's eyes slowly opening. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice weak and hoarse. "I'm here." She felt tears streaming down her face. "John, you came back to us," she said, her voice filled with emotion. John tried to smile, but the pain was evident. "I promised, didn't I? That I would do everything to protect you." Sarah nodded, holding his hand more tightly. "Yes, you promised. And you kept your promise." The following days were a slow and painful recovery for John. Sarah was by his side, helping in any way she could, while Daniel continued to offer his unconditional support. But the tension between the three was palpable. They knew a decision needed to be made, one that would affect everyone's future. One evening, while Sarah was on the porch with Daniel, looking at the sea, he broke the silence. "Sarah, I love you," he said softly, "and I want to be with you and your child. But I also want you to be happy, regardless of the decision you make." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, I love you too, but my heart is divided. John proved he has changed, and he is our child's father. I don't know how to make this decision." Daniel pulled her into a hug, feeling her pain as if it were his own. "Whatever you decide, I'll be here. If you choose John, I'll understand. What matters is that you follow your heart and do what's best for you and the baby." The next day, Sarah returned to the hospital to see John. He was sitting up in bed, stronger but still vulnerable. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his eyes fixed on hers. She sat beside him, waiting for him to continue. "I saw the way you look at Daniel," John began, "and I know he has been your support all this time. I love you, Sarah, and I always will. But I want you to be happy. If Daniel is who makes you happy, then you should be with him." Sarah felt a lump in her throat, tears streaming silently. "John, I don't know what to do. You both are important to me in different ways." He held her hand, his voice full of sincerity. "What matters is that you and our child are safe and happy. I can live with the pain of losing you, but I can't live knowing you're unhappy." Sarah hugged John, crying silently on his shoulder. She knew he was right, but that didn't make the decision any easier. She spent the night thinking, each heartbeat a reminder of the choice she needed to make. Finally, at dawn, Sarah knew what she needed to do. With a heavy heart, she went to Daniel. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling, "I love you, but John is our child's father and he needs us. I need to try to rebuild our family." Daniel, though devastated, slowly nodded. "I understand, Sarah, and I respect your decision. Just know that if you ever need me, I'll be here." She hugged him tightly, feeling her heart break but knowing she was doing the right thing. "Thank you, Daniel. I'll never forget what you did for me." As Sarah returned to the hospital to tell John her decision, she felt a mixture of sadness and relief. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was determined to try, for the sake of her child and the love she once shared with John. 15 Betrayals and Loyalties. Sarah's decision brought a new dynamic to life in Havenport. With John home and in the process of recovery, she found herself torn between supporting her husband and dealing with Daniel's absence, whose departure left a palpable void. The weeks passed, and although the routine brought an appearance of normalcy, the underlying tensions were impossible to ignore. One night, as Sarah tidied up the kitchen after dinner, John entered, looking restless. He hesitated before speaking, as if weighing his words. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice low. She turned to him, feeling a pang of worry. "What is it, John?" He sighed deeply, his eyes avoiding hers. "The smugglers. They're still after me. I got a message today. They want me to resume activities, or they threaten to come after us again." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "But you said you were out of it, that you had enough evidence to take them down." "I thought I did," John said, his voice trembling. "But it seems they have more power than we imagined. And now they're using you and our child as leverage." Sarah remained silent, processing the information. The fear was a constant shadow, but there was also a growing sense of betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she finally asked, her voice laden with pain. "I wanted to protect you," John said, desperate. "I didn't want you to worry more than you already were." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "John, we can't keep living like this with secrets and fear. We need a plan to end this once and for all." That night, as Sarah tried to sleep, she heard a noise coming from outside. Peeking through the window, she saw a familiar figure approaching the house. It was Daniel. Her heart leaped in her chest, a mixture of joy and worry. She quietly went downstairs and opened the door, finding Daniel on the porch. "Daniel, what are you doing here? I thought you had left." He looked at her, his eyes intense. "Sarah, I couldn't stay away knowing you were still in danger. I got information from Mike, and it seems there's one last chance to take down the smugglers once and for all." Sarah felt a wave of hope mixed with apprehension. "What did you find out?" Mike found additional evidence, documents linking the smugglers to larger operations. "If we can get this to the authorities, we can bring them down for good. But we need to act quickly and cautiously." John, who had discreetly followed Sarah, appeared in the doorway. "Daniel, I'm in. We need to protect our family, whatever it takes." Daniel nodded, the tension between the two men visible but suppressed by the urgency of the situation. "We need to plan this carefully," he said. "One wrong move and they could retaliate." They spent the night discussing the plan, each detail meticulously adjusted. They knew this was the last chance to resolve everything. At dawn they were ready. That afternoon, Sarah, John, and Daniel met Mike in a safe location. He handed over the documents, a nervous expression evident on his face. "This should be enough to bring them down," he said. "But you need to act fast." With the evidence in hand, they went directly to the local police station. The police chief, an experienced and just man, listened attentively as they explained the situation. "If this is true, we can organize an operation to arrest them all," he said. "But I need time to mobilize my team." Time was a luxury they didn't have. As they waited, the tension increased. Sarah tried to stay calm, but the fear for the future was overwhelming. Finally, the operation was set. The police, along with John and Daniel, prepared to raid the smugglers' hideout. Sarah stayed home, holding her child in her arms, praying for everyone to return safely. The raid was quick and precise. The police surrounded the location and arrested everyone involved. There was resistance, but John and Daniel, working together, ensured that none of the smugglers escaped. It was a victory, but not without cost. Back in Havenport, Sarah anxiously waited on the porch. When she saw John and Daniel approaching, both exhausted but unharmed, she ran to meet them, tears of relief streaming down her face. "You did it," she whispered, hugging them tightly. That night, as the moon shone over Havenport, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. There was a long road ahead, full of challenges and uncertainties, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. The days following the police operation were a blur of activities and emotions for Sarah, John, and Daniel. Havenport, once a quiet coastal town, had become the epicenter of intense and dangerous drama. But with the smuggler threat finally neutralized, a new sense of security began to settle. However, with this security came an uncertain future, full of decisions to be made and paths to be chosen. Sarah was sitting on the porch one morning, the baby sleeping in her arms, when John approached. He had a thoughtful expression, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Sarah, can we talk?" he asked, sitting next to her. She nodded, feeling the gravity of the moment. "Of course, John. What's going on?" He sighed, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Now that the smuggler threat is over, we need to think about our future. I want to be the best father possible for our child, and I want to be a good husband to you. But I know we can't just go back to what we were before. A lot has changed." Sarah looked at him, feeling a mix of affection and sadness. "John, I know you've changed, and I'm grateful for everything you've done to protect our family. But I also know we need to be honest about where we are now." Before they could continue the conversation, Daniel appeared in the doorway, as if sensing the need to join them. "Am I interrupting something important?" he asked, a slight smile on his lips. Sarah shook her head. "Actually, we were just discussing the future," she said, inviting him to join them. "And I think you should be part of this conversation." Daniel sat down, his gaze shifting from John to Sarah. "I'm listening," he said, his voice full of seriousness. John was the first to speak. "I love Sarah and I always will. But I also know that she has developed feelings for you, Daniel. And that's something we need to consider." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of the words. "Sarah, I know what we're facing isn't easy, and I know you have a big enough heart to love in different ways. But the final decision is yours." Sarah looked at the two men who meant so much to her, feeling the tears forming in her eyes. "I love you both," she said, her voice choked. "But we need to think about what's best for our child, and for ourselves." The three remained silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sarah took a deep breath and spoke. "I believe that, for our child, stability and the presence of both of you are important. But we also need time to understand how our relationships will work going forward." John nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. "I agree. We need time to heal and to build something new, something based on truth and mutual respect." Daniel also agreed. "I'll be here, Sarah, and I'll do whatever it takes to support you and your child, regardless of what the future holds." The following days were dedicated to finding a new rhythm for their lives. John focused on taking care of the baby and rebuilding his relationship with Sarah, while Daniel offered support and friendship. They took turns with responsibilities, each finding their place in the new family dynamic. One afternoon, while walking along the beach together, Sarah felt a calm settle in her heart. The sea with its gentle waves seemed to symbolize the peace she sought so much. "We'll make it," she said softly, looking at John and Daniel. "We'll find a way to be a family, even if it's different from what we imagined." Both men smiled, feeling the sincerity and strength in her words. They knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but they were ready to face them together. The love they shared, despite all the pain and betrayal, was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. Months passed, and slowly life in Havenport began to regain a sense of normalcy. The town, with its charming streets and friendly residents, became a haven for Sarah, John, and Daniel. They found a way to coexist, creating a unique and special family dynamic. Sarah, who had once felt lost and alone, now saw a future full of possibilities. She watched her child grow, surrounded by love and care from both John and Daniel. The wounds from the past were slowly healing, replaced by hope and a renewed sense of purpose. John focused on finding honest work and rebuilding his life. He joined a local fishermen's cooperative, learning new skills and establishing strong ties with the community. He was determined to be a better man and a good father, and each day was a step towards redemption. Daniel, for his part, became an essential presence in their lives. He helped with the house, supported Sarah emotionally, and found ways to be a positive influence in the child's life. His bond with Sarah was deep and sincere, and although they chose not to formalize their relationship, the connection they shared was undeniable. One sunny morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of renewal. She walked to the beach with her child in her arms, feeling the sea breeze on her face. John and Daniel followed, each carrying a part of the picnic they had planned. They found a perfect spot and spread a blanket on the sand, creating a moment of peace and happiness. As they sat together, enjoying the simplicity of the moment, Sarah felt a wave of gratitude. "We made it," she said softly, looking at the two men who had become pillars of her life. John smiled, his eyes full of hope. "Yes, we did. And we will continue to make it, one day at a time," Daniel added, his voice full of warmth. "Together we can face anything." That day, as they watched the waves crash gently on the shore, Sarah felt that they had truly found their place in the world. The past, with all its pain and trials, was a distant memory. The future, with all its uncertainties, was a canvas they were painting together. And so, in that small coastal town of Havenport, they found not only a refuge but a new beginning. A beginning full of love, hope, and endless possibilities. The sun was peeking over the horizon, bringing with it a new morning in Havenport. The small coastal town, marked by so many dramatic events in recent months, finally seemed to breathe in peace. In Sarah's house, a sense of renewal and hope filled the air. Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with a calm smile on her face. The aroma of fresh coffee and pancakes spread through the house. John entered, looking healthier and more energetic than ever. He approached Sarah and hugged her from behind, kissing her gently on the neck. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice full of affection. "Good morning, John," replied Sarah, turning to kiss him. "How are you feeling today?" "Better every day," he said with a sincere smile. "And very happy to be here with you and our child." Daniel entered the kitchen soon after, bringing with him a contagious energy. "It smells great in here," he said, grabbing a mug of coffee. "Looks like today is going to be a great day." The three sat down at the table, sharing breakfast and talking about future plans. There was a lightness in the conversation, a simple joy they hadn't experienced in a long time. Sarah looked at the two men who had become pillars in her life and felt a wave of gratitude. After breakfast, they decided to take a walk on the beach. The day was beautiful, with a clear sky and the sound of waves gently breaking against the sand. Sarah held John's hand on one side and Daniel's on the other, feeling complete and at peace. As they walked, they met several friends and neighbors, all offering warm greetings and smiles. Havenport was a close-knit community, and everyone had felt the turbulence that Sarah and her family had faced. But now there was a feeling of collective relief and celebration. That day, a fair was being held in the town's main square. Colorful stalls sold everything from local crafts to delicious foods. Children ran and laughed, and cheerful music filled the air. Sarah, John, and Daniel mingled with the crowd, enjoying every moment. At one of the stalls, an elderly lady selling flowers smiled when she saw Sarah. "These are for you," she said, handing her a bouquet of wildflowers. "You've been through a lot, and these flowers symbolize a new beginning." Sarah accepted the flowers with an emotional smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "They mean a lot to me." As night fell, the fair turned into a celebration with twinkling lights and live music. John, Sarah, and Daniel sat on a bench, watching the stars start to appear in the sky. "I remember when I first arrived here," said Sarah, her voice full of nostalgia. "I was lost and alone, and now I feel like I've found my home." John held her hand tightly. "You brought us together, Sarah, and for that I am eternally grateful." Daniel nodded, looking at the two with affection. "We are a family," he said, "and nothing can change that." The local band's music began to play a soft, romantic melody. John stood up and held out his hand to Sarah. "Would you like to dance with me?" She smiled, taking his hand. "Of course, John." As they danced under the stars, Daniel watched with a smile on his face. He felt happy and at peace, knowing he had found a place in Sarah and John's life, and that together they had overcome so many obstacles. When the music ended, Sarah kissed John and then turned to Daniel, pulling him onto the dance floor. "Your turn," she said, laughing. Daniel laughed and pulled her into a hug, dancing with her as the night continued. The future might still have challenges, but at that moment everything seemed possible. They had faced the worst and emerged stronger, more united. As the moon shone over Havenport, Sarah looked at the two men in her life and knew that, regardless of what the future held, they would face it together. It was the beginning of a new chapter, full of promises and hope.